And this evening's presentation is a lecture, The Ships of the Newburgh Shipyards, with New Windsor Town Historian Glenn Marshall. Mr. Marshall is the current serving Town of New Windsor historian, a post he has held for 21 years. He is a current member of the Board of Managers of the Historical Society of Newburgh Bay and the Highlands, past trustee of the National Temple Hill Association and Orange County Historical Society, as well as past board officer and member of the Brigade of the American Revolution. Mr. Marshall is retired from the Town of New Windsor Police Department. He is a graduate of Mercy College, Dobbs Ferry, New York, and holds a Master's of Public Administration from CUNY, John Jay School of Criminal Justice. As a product of his research, he provides Revolutionary War research material to media sources. Among his projects is the cataloging and transcribing of early New Windsor records from 1749 to 1949, some of which are currently available on the town website. So thank you and welcome.
Thanks. Good evening.
Hi.
My talk starts with this bell. This is how this starts, this whole process of this research. In my previous career, I was communications supervisor for the police department with all the dispatchers. And I was out, I was away, and I come back and they leave me a message. You gotta call Beaumont, Texas. They got a bell, something to do about New Windsor. So I was like, I don't know. Nobody seemed to know what it was about. So he reads it to me, and I'm like, I have no idea what it could be for. I thought maybe a schoolhouse, but it doesn't make sense. So finally, they packed it all up. It was beautifully packed. It comes, and we uncrate it, and then we find it. And then from there, the story starts.
How big is it?
It's about a 75-pound bell. I would have brought it tonight. I'm tired of lugging it.
It's fairly
Yeah, it's a decent size.
Yeah.
So what happened was, it was found in a drug raid. I don't know if they used it as flower pot or not. But I do know the ships, there were ships that were down at Beaumont. So it could have been taken off the ship. But this ship was sunk during World War II by a U-boat in the Caribbean. So unless somebody dove on it and got it off, but it came with no clapper and no finial. So we still have it. It's still part of the mystery, but we have it. We have at least one. So from there, I'll start this story. We learn it comes off of the ship, the New Windsor. So what is the New Windsor? You know, it's named after one of the communities here. So we find out there's more. So it's Newburgh Shipyards. So, and this story starts with the building of the shipyard after the bell. If I can get this thing a bit. Here we go. No, try that. This gentleman here, this is how I got these pictures. He worked in the yard, and his grandson is in another historic association, and he had all these pictures. And I had them for the longest time. And he gets himself taken in the picture. And they're in the yard. I'm going to show you how they built this yard, because it is amazing. And it says shipyards, meaning...
Do you know, is there dates on any of this?
Yes, this is how the story starts. Tom Desmond was a young engineer. And he told the people in the city of Newburgh in the spring of 1916, I'm gonna build a shipyard. I'm gonna bring shipyard jobs back to Newburgh. They said, you're crazy. You're just an idealist. It's not gonna happen, because the other yards had pretty much shut down. Marble was out. Marble went belly up. Eureka wasn't even there, but most of the other little shipyards were done. They weren't building any ships. And he says, I'm gonna build it. So he has partners up with a guy by the name of Irving Bush, there's a couple others, and he sends them, another guy by the name of Bennett, sends them to go look at European plans, European shipyards, how they were built. And they look, and then they go down onto the river, and they pick a spot. It's in the town of New Windsor to build a shipyard. Now, what's unique about this shipyard, it's not dredged. Not dredged. They didn't dredge the river. So this is the layout. I would use the pointer, but it doesn't show up on here. There's 4 ways, 1, 2, 3, 4. They could build 4 ships at one time, and they did. On the fitting out dock, as soon as after they were launched, one was launched, they pull them over to the fitting out dock. And there's various buildings. This is what he created down there. So his idea was, I'm going to build this yard. And people were like, no, no way it's going to happen. Well, they start putting pylons in. They stake it out where they're going to go with this. These are various angles, but most of these are direct on. I have others that'll show you up and down. So they have some dredges out below, but actually they're mostly pile drivers that they had. So they start driving the piles in, driving the piles, driving the piles, driving the piles. They're bringing in more timber. Now they're building as they're building, which is pretty incredible, because this didn't start until the end of 1916, early 1917. We weren't even in the war then. So there we go. Lots of coal to run the machinery. Lots and lots of coal. This is River Road in New Windsor. Originally, River Road, it's that white patch that goes down. So they built a gauge railroad on the other side. The house on the hill is the Governor Clinton, who lived up here, lived in New Windsor. He left New Windsor and never came back to this house. Christie Ludlow. So it's the Clinton Christie Ludlow house. It's had a lot of additions. So they start taking the bank out. They're using the bank to more buildings. This is one of the buildings going up. This would be the I think this is the administration building. This car, you see this car in a lot of pictures. And they have Walsh Construction Companies. So there was a lot of companies involved in building this. They start building this yard. One of these humongous steam shovels. And they're literally taking that hill away. The heights of New Windsor is what they're taking away. Stuff, the clay and stuff that the brickyards use, this is what they're taking out. Yards being built. Now, these buildings included a hospital, toilets, different shops, paint shop, carpentry shop, metal shop, and they're all still down there. And it's just a succession of all these buildings all the way down that they had. Looking down. They're they're already got, they're still working on the buildings, but they're building the ships. It is kind of amazing. But you'll see, this rail, this standard gauge track runs all through the whole yard. And it's quite amazing because that allowed him to be even more efficient. So they copied a lot of the European stuff. This is looking south down the river. They're still filling out the yards. Those buildings way up in the top corner, somebody was a brickyard person that was here before. That's the remnants of the Leahy Brickyard. That's there. Leahy Brickyard went belly up in 1912. Where did the bricks come from? They probably came from Jehovah downriver that could make this many bricks, because every building down there is brick. And this is probably the Newburgh that's sitting here on the dock. Oh, and the dock is in 40 foot of water. It's still there. Ladies from the hospital. They were very important because I read some of the newspaper accounts of some of the injuries these guys were getting, because they were literally throwing the rivets and driving them in, throwing the rivets and driving them in. Police department. They even had their own police department, which is kind of incredible. But there was a couple. I hired some pretty good guys, a couple experienced like New York City police that come there and police the yard. There was an incident early on where one of the guards found a bomb of some sort that was secreted. Made all the newspapers. I mean all the newspapers, coast to coast. That's the biggest story about the shipyard is in the newspapers, is the bomb. It never went off. They never caught anybody. There's the car again. This building is still there. Now this is on like VE Day. It's you know, all the Allied flags are flying up on the derricks, and this is the time clock office and like the routine office stuff, not the fancier offices that they have. And the road still goes into this yard today. You could drive down River Road and you could look. You'll see this road, and you see all this track. Well, that track isn't even there today. So this road kind of rode around through the town road, the river road went through the yard and everything else. They had to fix it later on. Administration building, that crazy tree is in it. This building is gone. I have never been able to figure out where this building went. It's a substantial building. Don't know where it went. Why? You know, can't find anything, reports of fire or anything. It's gone. And that's that building. And again, the tracks are still there. The road where the guy is walking is in the road, and the cars. And a little more of the hill is gone behind it. That building up in the corner I'll talk about a little bit later. And this is like a house for one of the superintendent for the yard. They built a house for him. I have, most of the information I have on it is either looking at the diagrams of the yard, what each building was. So it's pretty incredible. And this is, we're in 1917. We're building ships. Got to remember, they still didn't launch one yet. He's back here yet. They are building, these are not Liberty ships. These are Bridge for Pershing. And that's what this was all about, his bridge. On the job, job for victory. This was, a lot of these posters are out. This is they're driving in the very first rivet. He's Irving Bush. He's one of the directors of the yard into the gar boards of the Newburgh. It was a big to-do because it was putting a spike in the Kaiser's coffin. That's what they said at the time. And this is the plans. They're designed 1025. They were predominantly built in several different yards. It's fairly straightforward design. And as they went along with these ships, they improved on it. They also had passenger capability. They could take some passengers with them. And some of them got even better when they had multi-fuel. They could run multi-fuel, coal, oil, whatever you could throw in it, into the boiler. The Newburgh didn't have it. The Newburgh makes progress August 1st, 1918. So it's going up. This is the day that they were going to launch the Newburgh. 10,000 people showed up. It's incredible how many people showed up. And that's the office building that I showed you previously. This is the time clock building and various things that they use them for. Mostly, it was like a barrack, but that's where the shipyard police stayed too, because they did have police there. Later on, they had soldiers in the yard. And here's Teddy Roosevelt. How did Tom Desmond get Teddy Roosevelt to come to this yard? This is a really incredible story. Tom Desmond was born in 1897 in Middletown, New York. His mother was his teacher. He ends going into MIT at some point, early, young. He goes to MIT, graduates in 1909, graduates from MIT. Now what Tom Desmond does, rather than just go and be an engineer, he goes and works with the men on engineering projects out in the far west, and he works for a number of years, 5 or 6, 7, 8 years, before he comes back to New York and opens his own civil engineering firm. He meets him at 12 at the Orange County Fair. They're at the Orange County Fairgrounds, and Roosevelt is visiting the fair. So he runs up to him, because at that time, he was a public figure, and he meets with him. I don't find any correspondence. I've looked. There is correspondence, but not early on. But anyhow, he's here with the ladies that are going to launch the ship, and he's wearing an armband for Quentin, his son that got shot down a month or two before in Europe. So he comes to the yard. He's He's coming here to give a speech. He's here on a mission. This is the Newburgh. She's all set. It's pretty, the crowd's like right in on it. It's a pretty good shot. So he's sitting there, sliding out. Hi. It's going, it's out in the river. There's Tom Desmond, and Teddy Roosevelt in the inset. The launching crew. Roosevelt's main mission to come here, he wanted to start a regiment of engineers, Corps of Engineers, to send over to France. And he had picked Desmond to be one of the colonels to run that regiment. Woodrow Wilson says to Teddy Roosevelt, no, you're an ex-president. If you go over there and you get killed, I'll never live it down. You know, they'll pound me the rest of my life. So he says, no. He says, you're better off here. You're more of use to the public here. So he comes to the yard, and he gives his famous, I call it the loafer slack, it's the slacker speech, about the slacking and the slowdown in work production in some of these yards. A lot of the workers were foreigners that came in, new immigrants and stuff. So he came here because of the record of the yard and his connection to Tom Desmond. You know, a connection that started at age 12, you know. And he come and he gave this speech. And it's in all the newspapers. You can look up the slacker speech. That's what I call it. You know, people were loafing in the yards, they were stymieing production, ships weren't getting made, and they needed the ships. You know. They had their own band. It was amazing. Top name people that played in that band, you know, later on, in years past. One guy ends up running in Cuba, in all the clubs down in Cuba later on. He was a famous conductor. Here's Mrs. Bush. She's the director's wife, and she's preparing to strike the bow with her champagne bottle. Interesting enough, they gave them all a presentation bottle. And it's all wrapped and it's all done, and somebody did the macrame with rope. I've seen a close-up picture, and it's pretty neat. You know, and then they had their flowers and stuff. Local poet. I asked, he was from Bombville, that's all I know. Nobody else could tell me anything when I did at this Historic Society. But it was on the launching. You know, they were really, you know, we're just getting over there, you know. Here's Teddy Roosevelt.
This was at the end of the war?
Well, it went to November, but these ships had other use, you know.
But I'm saying this was...
Yeah, they needed to get supplies over, lots of supplies, because Europe was pretty devastated. And he was the keynote speaker, he's hanging on. Interesting enough, but this is probably the last public appearance that Teddy Roosevelt made, because he was dead in January. He was in very poor health at this time. Very, very poor health. And he did it because of Tom Desmond. Let's go. This is the next one up. This is the New Windsor. It's sitting there. The problem was flu epidemic hit the yard. So they curtailed. They had to do it during a work week. It was supposed to be done on Columbus Day. It didn't happen because too many people were sick. So they launched that one. This is just some of the work that's going on. It's all over the place. They had a pretty good work record, even though they had some injuries. And the reason being is Tom Desmond thought of everything. The old Broadway school in Newburgh, he had night classes to train the workers. He figured if a guy's coming for a job and I'm giving him a job, I'm going to make sure he can do a job. You know, if he can't carry a bucket of rivets, or he can't do this, I'll find a job for him. And if he has the aptitude, I'll train him for a job. Because he figured he had a $50 to $100 investment in each guy that came in the yard. And at peak, they had over 2,000 people working there. So, and that was another innovation. Train, have night school. And they did, they had night school. And these guys, they had contests. They had big contests in the yard. Who could do so many rivets in a day? And there was a big guy from Newburgh that beat them all out. And his family still lives in Newburgh, an African-American family. They're putting the boiler stacks up on these, to bring them off. So they're probably finishing in Newburgh because that's the new Windsor right there. And the bells. I discovered these records because nobody could tell me. I discovered these records while I was bringing records out of one of the vaults in the town hall. I said, I've looked for these for years, and they were in a folder with other stuff, that just not related to any. So I have a lot of the letters, how they did it. They went around, I can explain to you. They went around to different communities because they built the Newburgh, the New Windsor, the Walden, the Poughkeepsie, the Fishkill, the Irvington, from way down, the Peekskill, Storm King, Firthcliffe, Half Moon, and I think I missed one. Oh, the Monroe. The Monroe. I missed that one. How would I miss that one? And the Cold Spring. So what they did is they had to get the community to buy in. The women didn't want to give bells. They wanted the china, the ship's china. And it wasn't practical on these ships. So it came out, they got the bell. They got the big bell and they had a smaller bell. And that's, these are all about what it cost. They had a little bit of extra money and they got, mostly it was the school kids. They would collect the pennies and stuff. There's lots of newspaper articles about it. The stern. Now, it's not in its final paint yet. There it is. That was the first one. It's the SS Newburgh, but as soon as they finished, it became the USS Newburgh. The United States Navy took this ship immediately. Pretty interesting colors.
It was a beautiful ship.
Yeah. That's on December 30th, 1918. So it was on its way. I think this may be, no, it's still in the Hudson Valley yet. There's the naval crew that was on board. It's the only picture that exists, and I found it by fluke. And again, the bell. And more on the bells. If I had found this in 1984, I would have, would have been the greatest clue of them all, but it's...
So where were all the rest of the bells?
Well, a lot of them went down with the ship. The
Nobody
Monroe...
pirated them?
No, a lot of them got scrapped. A lot of these ships, this is the problem,
Oh,
they
were steel
overbuilt
ships
ships.
and
Overbuilt.
scrapped the whole
Totally overbuilt. Desmond had everything covered. He got Marvel to come back up from North Carolina because he was down working in a shipyard. That's how it says shipyards. He took over the Marvel yard because initially he thought he was going to build wooden ships. Then the government said, no, we want steel ships. So there were some wooden ships built up here. At that, they ended up, okay, you'll build them up north, So they had 2 yards. But there was another yard in the middle too. I'll get to that towards the end because I just discovered some pertinent information about that yard. They were building oilers. So this is mostly just the letters. Actually, I ended up corresponding with his son, Ro. He sent me the first picture of one of the ships. We didn't have any pictures available at the time. This is the New Windsor. It's shaping up. I kind of varied some of these photos so you can see, details on construction. They got a lot of steel in there, a lot of steel. They prefab some stuff too, so he was ahead of his time. He was way ahead of Kaiser, with the Kaiser's coffins and stuff. He was way ahead with the prefab. Again, that's that rail in the yard, and there's a building. I'll show you. That one's all nice and neat. Hall number 2 to New Windsor, it's all ready to go. The band people are all assembling there. Not too many people showed up because of the flu. Mrs. Rowe. The fancy name for New Windsor. New Windsor on the Hudson.
How does Newburgh relate to New Windsor?
We're next door to each other.
Yeah.
We're on the south side of the creek. They're on the north side of the creek. The Quisay Creek. Quisay Creek.
So Say again?
The Quissake Creek. We're on the south side of the creek, they're on the north side. So when I go into the Historic Society, I always say, well, I gotta go back across the creek, I'm going home, I'm going home. I actually have the names, there's numbers on a couple of these. This is a Reuben, and who some of these people are, which is amazing. And they have their shipyard badges on, and I have a couple of pictures of them. She's getting ready to do her job here. Oops. She's got her bottle, she's got her flowers from this as a sponsor. Out it goes. Now they're painting this. Now there was a change after the war in painting instructions because now we're at peace. So this one gets painted in the new colors that the rest of the ships will be done in. This is all the New Windsor. Pushing her into the dock. Oh, I should have commented. The yard had its own flags, so they're all the different flags of the yard. Facing south, and the work is beginning. And this is that one that was in that very early picture. I can tell just because of the line on the water line. They're bringing her back. They just let them roll out into the middle of the river, and then maybe they could get over the beacon. I don't know, over the fish kill. Yeah.
Well,
They bring it back.
they wanted to make sure that the boats were going to stay.
Yeah. There, see, this is the peacetime painting of a ship, of one of those. And that was ready to go. That's the earliest picture I have fully completed. Now, another problem. The propellers. They had a lot of problems with propellers. The Newburgh too. They had to send a propeller over, made it across with a load of foodstuffs, powdered milk, flour, everything that needed to go over. And they were losing blades. So it took them a bit that they were stripping out to figure this process out, what was going on. Lots of wood, lots and lots of wood. This is the Walden. Newburgh Shipyards. This is actually the peak still, or the Poughkeepsie. It's at anchor.
Is it like white and gray?
It's not quite a white, and there's a red line. It's sort of like oxide red bottom on it,
Oh, okay.
and the stack is also painted.
And
These
all these were single prop or dual
they-
spur?
they're single, that I can tell,
Yeah.
but they did some. They started tweaking them after the Newburgh. The New Windsor had it was multi-fuel. It could, like I said, it could burn coal, bunker, whatever they could get, they could pour in there. That's what it worked. It had different dynamos and generators in it. So they made improvements. They learned,
But mostly single.
Yeah.
prop.
She's just idling. And we're coming up to hull 4. So that's May 28, 1918. Look, they numbered them all. It's all ready. Everything's nice and neat and numbered. And that's the Walden going down. And these are the people. I got these from the Walden Historical Society. At least she labeled them for me. I was grateful because it's hard to figure out people sometimes. Yeah, all the flowers. The sponsor would give. They gave flowers to like each other. It was a big thing to do that.
And there was a band, and
Yeah.
they did all kinds of things.
She's got her bottle. This guy with the hat, that's Tom Desmond. And I know what he's saying. He's got his hand on it, and he can feel the ship just starting to quiver on there. And he's going, do your job. Smash that bottle now, because it's going, And the newspaper accounts are great, because they're very detailed. And that's a naval officer. And away she goes. This is the launching crew. Yeah, the launching crew. And these are all Reuben. And that car again. I'll get back to that car again.
When you say Reuben,
Reuben, the photographer. There's the Walden. Reuben in the corner. It's just sitting out there. We gotta bring it in. There's the Walden. It's at the fitting out dock. It's pretty close to being done there now, at that point. Now these ships were assigned. Some companies would take them and operate them for the emergency fleet operations. So I've tracked the comings and goings of them. Some of them made, different voyages here and there. November 28th, 1918. So the war has ended and they're still building. Cold Spring. That's the best picture I have is the back. Can't find one. Nobody down in Cold Spring even knows there was a ship called Cold Spring. No. Even the old historian, because I had to look up and call his number, and he's 90-some years old. No, I don't remember. Okay. Now this is a thing that Lynn, she went nuts on this thing. It took me a while to figure out what this building, where it is down there. This is the administration building. There's that car again. That's Joe's Shipyard Hotel. I have an ad for it. It had 44 rooms. But if you drive down here today, you don't see that building. It's like, where did it go? Well, they cut it down. The Cimarellis came here, an Italian family, and it was too big, so they kind of just took out what they didn't need.
And what
Took
is
me
it? And where is it?
It's on River Road, right on River Road, right across from me.
And what is it?
It's a hotel and a cafeteria. Now Joe is Joe Cohen. Joe Cohen and his brother, they lived out somewhere out in the town of Newburgh, but they were involved with the circus. So Joe says, he gets this guy, Max Hirsch was the architect in New York City. They released a contract because they had a problem with housing. There's a lot of people here working in this yard, lots of people, and housing is a problem. And later on I'll show you what one of the solutions was. So they had, housing was a big problem. Food was a big problem. And wasting of food, that was a sin at that time. And a lot of the talks from the yard people, or when they were launching, they always had a big meal after. But wasting of food, because it was in hard demand, because if you were wasting it, the boys over there weren't getting it, and that's a big thing. So anyway, Joe and his brother, they open a hotel. They get the contract. The hotel goes up, they get the contract. He was the guy, I had to track him through circus history to figure out what his function was. But when you would go into town and you would see the circus posters, and they would be generic usually, unless they had a sideshow, and they had it all slapped with a name. That was Joe's business, all over. He would do them for everybody, Ringling, whatever. There it is. Found an ad, opposite the shipyards. They lost the key. It's a pretty big building, seating capacity for 600 people. But they had lots and lots of dinners. They had a lot of sport events. The yard was in, there was a lot of soccer games. They would go and play down in the city a lot. They would go and play the yards down in the city. And anytime they won, they got treated to a big dinner here. So it was a popular thing.
So our key has been lost means they're open day and night.
They never closed.
That was their joke,
Never
yes. We lost the key, therefore we're here all day and night.
And to find out he worked at, the circus, but it makes sense because the circus had a lot of people to feed. They ate all different hours, so he had it down. He had a process for it. It's the Poughkeepsie and the Walden together. At this point, they're waiting for assignments to be sent over to the emergency fleet group to come get them. 4.5, I have some copies. They had their own magazine, and each, not each month, but they publish more than one a month, and they're pretty high quality. It gives you a lot of stuff about people that worked in the yard. They sold ads. They even had vaudeville shows they put on. They put a huge vaudeville show on at Cohen's on Broadway in Newburgh. A big, huge vaudeville show. It was all the men in the yard. So they had a lot of activities going on. Bowling, soccer, they did it all. And this is the peak skill. I've been trying to get a picture. My friend is the city historian. He brings me this one. I was like, really? And this is launching the Monroe. She was the pick of the yard personnel. She was 15 years old, and they picked her because she was a favorite employee. So they picked the employees had to pick an employee. The Monroe served quite a bit, and it up into the 50s. The Bell was returned to the Monroe, but it's lost. They've tried to find it because I spurred them into trying to find it, and they can't find it. They don't know if it went out. Had to be after if the scrap drives were over, so it's probably sitting sometime, some year in the future it'll show up. There's the pit. The band's in the pit. Now all this is all these launchings. Tom was the master showman. That's what he did. You don't see him too much, but he was orchestrating everything.
How many people work there?
Over 2,000. They hit 3,000 at one point, and then they started retrenching back. There's the Cold Spring, the Firth Cliff, and the Peekskill. 3 of them. They're stacking them.
How many they build altogether?
Well, they built some other ships too. After this, they built some fruit boats and some sulfur boats. So he had a contract. They built over 20 boats altogether. The fish gill. We didn't get it. Nobody was interested, I guess, in sponsoring anything up this end. I don't know why, but
What was involved in sponsoring?
it was like providing the bells, basically. You bought into it, that you would buy the bell, and But a lot of times they came by train, they came by boat. They're by the hundreds would come up, like from Peekskill. There was so many people coming up, and they had special trains to bring people. Now this is the Kiever. That's not the real name of it, but it was. These names got changed around later on. That's a later picture of one of them in a dock, and this would have been a sulfur boat. And the Alancha was a fruit boat. Pretty interesting. This is a conveyor system to put bananas on, part of the Great White Fleet. And it was able to get in. They took a lot more passengers. They had some bigger staterooms too. I have a blueprint of their sailings. Chiquita. It was United, then Chiquita. They changed. There was the banana boat wars down there too. They got in the middle of that. Actually, it was the largest navy. It was larger than the United States Navy at one time. This is the Cholatica. I have some stories about them later on, after their names changed. And this is the one. The Cholatica was renamed the Taiping. It was the Chinese Titanic. This is people fleeing mainland China to Taiwan, and they packed that boat. It was packed. The boat was used during the war by the government. Actually, they took these boats and they used them for boats. They used them for food and if they were bringing casualties home. So it got sold off. It went to China. It was in the China Steamship Company. And that's a picture of, I can't read it. It's another one. It's probably the Kiever again. And then Henry Frosch, that was another sulfur boat. These are sulfur boats that they built. Government took these boats all later on. For World War II, not during World War I. There's another one went down. The Kamiyaga was torpedoed and sunk with loss of life. Okay, now we're back to the yard again. I wanted to cover those ships that I don't have a lot on. This is inside that big glass building, the Hull Fabricating shop. If you go down on River Road, it says metallurgical on it now. And the rail is in there. So they did a lot of prepping and doing a lot of the welding to bring it out. Prefabbed. And that's the metallurgical building. It's still there today. A lot less glass in it.
The buildings are still there, are they still in use? Or
They're probably using it for boat storage. They used to have gun shows in there. At one time, metallurgical, I'll just tell you a little story what metallurgical was. After World War II, we had a lot of Indian silver. Our government supplied a lot of countries with silver that was mixed with nickel, tin, whatever for coinage. So in the end, India was one that, it was millions that they sent the coins back. So the coins were sent to one of the depositories in New York City. I figured they would send them to West Point Foundry, but they didn't. They were too heavy, so they had the rail, so they came up with the idea. This company was from Utah, and they had a process for smelting them to recover the silver. The government wanted the silver, whatever else metallurgical got. Now they were here in the 60s, they were still working doing it. So they did millions and millions of dollars worth of silver. They left, and for a short period of time, they were back in the 80s, they came back because they had this process and they came and used the same building again, early 80s. And that's it then. Beautiful picture of the building with all the glass. Two nice cars. This boat is a Corvette. This is World War II. I'm into World War II period. There's a Canadian and an American Coast Guard ship, and they're chasing a submarine. This submarine had sunk, previously had sunk the New Windsor, and another one had sunk the Poughkeepsie. They were, how they got into World War II was they were both moored side by side. So originally they were going to scrap them, and then they went down and did a hull inspection, and they were perfect condition. So they were taken by Alcoa Aluminum. But after it was sunk, they decided, they were going to try and get that sub, and that sub was probably heading back to Germany, and they did get it. They blew the conning tower off. Unfortunately, they killed the captain. He was trying to surrender it. And it went down. They did bring the men in. I have pictures, but I won't put them up. This is the Lifeboat Compass from the Alcoa Mariner. It's wood. It's in the Smithsonian, but it's not in the American history. It's in, there's a medical wing that has medical stuff. And what I found out when I talked to the person down there, when I found it, it was because the guy was a veteran and he had like some medical issues and stuff. So he had donated the compass with all his other stuff, and it went. It's a paper faceplate, and it gyros. So they took some better pictures of it for me. These are better ones that they took. So I said, "How did you find it?" I said, "I looked." This picture is the same as here. This is the Poughkeepsie. And this is in World War II. It's in Mobile Bay. It's in the colors that they were painting them at that point in time. They did put deck guns on here. They had a naval armed guard on board, and they would have had a gun on that rear deck, a pretty good sized gun that would have been on that deck. It's probably there because they've covered that rear deck, and it's probably in there, but probably hidden right now. Housing. This is in Newburgh. This is up off of Fullerton Avenue. They built all these houses. Tom Desmond, again, he gets a big grant to build housing for his people. But when the wars ended, now he's still got the loans and everything, so he absorbed it all, and they sold them. And a lot of people live up there. If you come off of Fullerton Avenue into Newburgh, you'll see them. There's brick, then you go a couple streets over, there's some white ones, but there are various configurations. Some like this. This building is right in front, the Clinton statue is right in front of this, where they had moved it. And it was a store, a meat market, you know, it's been different things over time. So they kind of tried to make a neighborhood, you know, that's what he had in his mind. This is the yard, it's pretty idle, it's after World War I, it's no time. 30s, I think it's 1939. Strangely and oddly enough, this yard was not used during World War II to build ships. Truman was the senator, was they had a committee to go around and see what were viable yards. And they figured it would cost more to bring this up to, you know, current standards, so they didn't really build anything here. But the Navy took it, because there was issues back and forth over time with the money that was spent, and the Navy used it. It was a huge quartermaster area down there. They had a Naval Reserve building out front, so all like naval stores were here. This is the Taiping. Now they refitted that fruit boat, or that boat that I showed you before, and they added it for 500 passengers. They did a painting and they did a movie, Chinese did, because what happened was when this ship went down with all those people, 30 people were recovered between the other ship that hit it. They were running no lights in the straits, and a lot of the people never knew what happened. So they made a movie called The Crossing, and it came out I think 2014 or 2015, and it explained the story, because a lot of those poor people, they never saw their family again. That monument is in a spot where normally people couldn't go because it's on a naval base. But anyway, this is a painting of the ship, and they actually made a model of it. So this is in the World War II period. The yard next door was Tank Shipbuilding Corporation. Now, Chicago Bridge and Iron was there also building at some point. But Tank Shipbuilding Corporation were building oilers, they built some docks, and they were building them in 1918. So they were simultaneously, that yard was going. It had nothing to do with Desmond, it was another yard planted next to his, and he had marbles up further. So these are done in marble yard. These are those huge floating dry docks. They could pin them together. They could bet a battleship in it, and they did. So they were building these in Newburgh. These still exist. These are existing pictures. They towed them. They had to be towed by tug, and they towed them. This, I think, was the first one. It went to Guam. It's still over in Guam. But they were all outfitted with guns. They had lots of guns on them, anti-aircraft, whatever. They had, they kind of hardened them up to defend. Now you got a barge with a derrick on it, a crane, and two more cranes that they added to that. And this one is in. This is the Richmond. It was called. They renamed these things. They had numbers, and then they went to names, and then they changed the names over time. They could put them all together. They could pin these all together. This one is the original one. It's in Guam. It's kind of crusty and rusty, but it's still being used. They left it. The government gave it to the government of Guam. They didn't use it anymore. This is the last one, the Resolute. This is at decommissioning in Norfolk. It's AFDM10. They all have different numbers. And this one is now in Seattle. There's a shipyard up in Seattle that got it. And this is what they were used for all those years. They supported the U.S. Navy's ballistic and nuclear submarine program. They had to come out of the water on a regular basis. And having these things that were still built here in this yard in the 40s made it easy for them to do it. They had them stationed in various locations. This is another earlier one with the tugs. I tracked this one, and then I lost the information where it was. And they're towing these out. So they made a couple earlier, and then the other ones were later pictures. And this is the yard as it would look today if you were to stand on the tracks and look down. These were all the toilet buildings, the paint building, the little hospital building that are all in that one stretch. And they're pretty intact. And I got one other thing, and I don't have a picture, but I was talking about the other yard next door, Tank Building Ship Corporation. They were building oilers. There's a couple famous photographs and document, media you see of Pearl Harbor. It's a Pearl Harbor ship. You'll see that oiler going past the Nevada. You see this oiler out in Pearl Harbor. It's moving past the ships. That's that oiler that was built down here. They had a couple of them out there. One got sunk, probably by the Japanese early on, just before Pearl. It was hit something. It was sunk. And this one, you see it goes through the thing. I was looking up the records on it. They were both awarded, the ships have awards, medals, they issue medals, and it had World War I. So they were used during World War I. But they towed one, it's in a cove, it's rotted away, it's completely rotted away, and that was one of these yard oilers, YOs, they're called YOs. And it's pretty famous. They wanted to save it because it was there on that day. It was a witness. And it actually went and pumped oil out. It was pumping oil out of the ships that were on fire. They were pumping as much as they could off, to keep that, try and suppress the flames. So the yards, it was a collection. Desmond had the big yard and he had the small yard, and there was a little yard next to him. Later on they built, more floating docks and stuff, Chicago. But a lot of them are credited to the West Coast, but they were actually building them here. Some of the records are sketchy with what went on. Desmond goes on after the war. He meets Alice Desmond, and he had an estate up in Newburgh. It gave it to Mount St. Mary's. And he runs for the New York Senate, and he served in the Senate from 31 to 59. Very progressive, got a lot of legislation passed. He could have been governor, but he decided to stay where he could do the most good. That was his thing. He made money, made a lot of money after this. He went to New York. He built a huge building that's up over New York Central. The tracks are all underneath it. He made a lot of money in construction later, but never gave up his early ideas. Working with the men, that was his big thing, working with the men, so he could see how men work. So that's what I have. I mean, this is my little shorter program, because I figured there would be questions, because I have lots of pictures, right? Lots.